Hello, everybody. Welcome to our 2:30 session. It is sure to be an exciting one. I know this topic is on the heart of a lot of people, especially in the times that we're in. And first, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Kimberly Hodges. I own a public outreach and event consultancy for nonprofits. And a lot of my nonprofits are K-12 entities, such as Mentoring to Manhood, Young Women of Society. And I also support the ARC of Prince George's County, which is support youth with with different disabilities. So that is my background. I would like to now introduce you to the man of the hour that we're speaking to is Dr. Theodore S. Ransaw. And I want to tell you a little bit about this author. He has a book. It's called Mindful Teaching Practices for Black Male Achievement. It is an exceptionally timely book. The historical inequalities of our nation's education system are well documented. And as the world looks for a new normal in the post-COVID era, now is the time for current practitioners to re-examine the efforts towards providing an equitable education for all students. This is what was said about Dr. Ransaw. It says here that Dr. Ransaw expertly details the historic and contemporary cultural experiences of Black males, how those experiments are perceived by educators, and the effect their variables have on Black male students in our nation's schools today by providing actionable recommendations. Dr. Ransaw has created a toolbox that current educators can implement to have an immediate impact on their students. And that was Kenneth Fraga. He's assistant principal at Anacostia High School, at Sakotita, Texas. Also, what was said about Dr. Ransaw is this book is a forward-thinking and thoughtful. He's an American patriot and energy and passionate delivery of information and practices that rightfully target improving the education of African-American students, especially Black males in the United States of America. His delivery and research is inspiring in his audiences, providing hope for a great future of American democracy. His knowledge is critical for the advancement of all children in the United States of America. And in fact, the United States of America itself. His research and passionate delivery moves his audiences to patriotic action around equity that uplifts all and will help you take steps toward the eradication of disparity in the United States of America, uplifting all and making our country even stronger and hopeful in the future. So, sir, that is a mouthful. Yes. That is, just reading it is inspiring. It's triggering a lot of questions and things, but I want to start with, why was this on the forefront of your heart and your mind to write this book? Why Black males?
Well, thank you, Kim, and hello, everyone. So why this book and why Black males? Well, I started out, I had no desires or gumptions or thinking about doing anything in higher ed. That was not my destination. However, I wound up, after I finished my master's, I wound up needing a little bit of extra monies to pay back some of my bills, so I was a substitute teacher, and that's kind of how I started on this role. So in my Ph.D. program at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and for those of you who don't know, there's actually a university in Las Vegas back in the early 80s or late 80s, late 80s, early 90s, the UNLV rebels were on the top of the planet, and so that was my freshman year. Have no idea how I graduated, but anyway, that means
I feel the same way. How did I graduate?
There's a lot of good stuff going on, especially on that campus. So anyway, while I was working on my PhD program in the College of Education, I was also on African and African American Studies, and I invited an older gentleman to come into my class to speak to some of my students in my African American Studies class, and he wound up being someone that had worked for Dr. King right around I think from 64 till Dr. King's death. So he was around, worked for him formally after that, but worked with him transcendentally to that. So when the gentleman comes into class, talks to my students, by the end of the class, a few black males had wanted to do a class project. They decided to go with them to a school, and everybody was so excited. Oh, young black males going to a school and helping out, younger black males. Everyone was all excited, and I was like, hey, wait a minute, hold up. We need to have assessments, we need to have plans, we need to have all this paperwork. And since I was working part-time as an adjunct instructor in African American studies, and I was PhD student in College of Ed, I was able to get documents and papers and assessments and rubrics put together. And so 3 weeks after that gentleman had come to class, his name was Dr. Robert L. Green, we wound up having a mentorship program.
Wow.
By the 3 years later, we had 4 mentorship programs and 3 at-risk schools. And as you mentioned, that things happen in the school, and you talked a little bit about your background. I started out working with students with special needs as a substitute teacher, but by the time I was in my PhD program, we wound up doing so many things with black males because there's such a high need. So I did a program for black males. I did one also for women of color, young girls of color, and we did one for college students, and I also did a plan for admin when you actually get hired in administration and working with black males. Never got to the last 2. We did the black males, everybody wanted that. So I wound up being a specialist, and I wound up doing things related to outreach right from the very beginning. And subsequently, when I graduated with my PhD in curriculum and instruction, I was hired here at Michigan State to be the Achievement Gap Specialist for males of color. So that's my content area, and that's how I got into that. Again, that's not where I wanted to go. I had no auspices about winding up getting a PhD. So as someone has said many times, how did I get here? That's how I got here. And so the reason why, that's how I got here. So I think that was important. But your direct question was, why is that important and why now? Well, about a year and a half ago, I came across some research, and I'm going to speak a lot slower because it's not necessarily complicated, but it's hard to process. Up till now, there has not been an editor of color for any of the sociological and the psychological journals that have come out. So
Wow.
when people say the so-and-so research says that, the psychologists say none of those were edited by an editor of color. The majority of the folks who have written those articles were not people of color. We're talking about less than 8%. The research that was conducted on all of the psychological journals that we have. So this is the studies when people say, according to the so-and-so psychological study, not an editor of color, probably not a researcher of color, and most definitely not, that research was not conducted on a person of color till now. And so I'm here to talk to you about my book, Mindful Teaching Practices for Black Male Student Achievement.
Yes.
And the reason why this book is important, it's a cognitive behavioral therapist approach to help teachers work with Black males to help them do better in school. So not that it is groundbreaking with regards to having a book about Black males, but written from a very specific point of view where there's a psychological approach written by a person of color who has worked with Black males, who has had good and bad experiences, and tied it into something that's psychological, or a book that helps with internal shifts about building growth mindsets with working with Black males. That part I think is novel, and that's the book Mindful Teaching Practices.
So listening to you and just thinking about some things that I've run across. Sometimes some of my colleagues that are teachers that are not of color are kind of like intimidated about going to getting a book like this, or going to a class like this because they feel they might like not understand, or they might say something wrong. Do you feel that your book it is could I guess help a person, a teacher, not of African American diaspora, or a brown or any other, like could help them with maybe some concerns of how they are working uh with with Black males?
That's an excellent question, and I'm glad you asked that. Well, first of all, there is no research that says that white teachers cannot teach Black males. To
Right.
be very honest, from the bottom of my heart, if it had not been for white teachers, I never would have wound up getting a PhD. And so,
Wow.
what I mean by that, if there had been white teachers who had met me and said that, hey, he's a Black male, I may not be able to have a strong connection, I may not be able to help them, I wouldn't have got here. And as we all know, in higher ed, Black male professors are less than 3%. I've only had two Black male teachers in my entire life, and this is from K-12 all the way to PhD program.
Wow.
Only had two, and those were two professors that I had, right? So I can't honestly say that it was this Black person that came out and helped me. I can't say that because it didn't happen. So that being said, research suggests that having a person of color may help students. Well, that's not as clear cut as we think it is. But so to answer your question, though, for me specifically, and working with teachers, the most important thing about the book Mindful Teaching Practices is to help teachers have the growth mindset that despite their background, where they were raised and their color, that they can still make strong connections. And also, again, to be very honest, everybody is usually wanting me to say, well, what's my story and how did I get here? I don't have a story. I have a series of really good experiences. I had a series of really bad experiences. So, for example, I got cussed out when I was in third grade by a principal. We got cussed out by a principal, a white female principal. Right? However, in my dissertation committee, I had a young lady that was in charge of doc students, but on my dissertation committee, and that's the committee, for those who may not be aware of, that gives you the green light to say that you got your PhD and help you get through the program. I came into her office one day, walked by and said hi, and she says, come in here, sit down. And I sat down, and she started yelling at me, and I'm like, who is this white woman yelling at me like she thinks that she's my mother? And I'm telling you, you need to make sure that you write. She asked me to write a paper. I wrote a paper, I handed it in. It wasn't a topic I was really interested in. She was like, you're not passionate, you're not doing enough. And it's not about you, it's about you making a difference. And what the hell is this woman yelling at me like she's, and I looked and I was like, oh, she really does think that she's my mother. She had adopted me.
Wow.
And I didn't know. I was her student, right? And I'm
Right.
like, I'm thinking this is a crazy white. I'm trying to get out the house. Okay. And I'm trying to leave. He says, no, no, sit down. You're going to fix your paper right now. And I said, but I have a class to teach. He said, no, you're going to be late. You're going to fix this. I don't even remember what the paper was. Paper's not important. So what I'm getting at is that I've had both good and bad experiences. And so the reason why that's important, you can have bad experiences in school and actually still be okay. And I don't think that that's something that's heard very often. I had some horrible experiences by some white teachers. I had a white male teacher. He was horrible to me. He was disrespectful, condescending. But for some reason, he found out that I was interested in Egypt. This was in Catholic school, by the way. And so since he was a Catholic priest, he used to walk by and every once in a while he'd give me a book about Egyptology. So I learned a lot about Black folks from
Wow.
a white male priest who didn't particularly like me, and he was just giving me books because he had stuff on his desk. And so I learned to learn from folks that don't like me, right? And so in school for me, and this will tie back to your earlier point, for me, it never really mattered if my teacher cared about me. That never really made a difference. I looked at school as an obstacle. I'm trying to get from A to B, and this is a do or die situation. Either I graduate or I'm putting my foot in your behind. That's what's my attitude, right? And consequently, research suggests that for Black males who have internal motivation as opposed to external motivation, they typically thrive in PWIs, primarily white institutions. And so most of the schools that I went to were white teachers, white students. I didn't necessarily need Black folks for me to thrive. Some folks do, and some folks don't. And so that's why the conversation about Black males and what may work and what may not work might need to be revised a little bit, just a little bit of change of ideology. But more than anything else, the takeaway from mindful teaching practices is that if you walk into a situation and you're mindful, right, your heart is open, you can have strong connections with Black male students, and Black male students you never thought that you'd have a strong connection with, and it's possible to happen. And that's how some teachers, a few of my teachers, have relationships with me.
So mindful teaching practices, take me through sort of like not chapter to chapter, but like what like are there tips? And you said there's tools. Can you like indulge me a little bit and give me some of those tips and tools?
Sure. So there's a lot of quick, short things, and that's in the toolkits, which is at the end of the book. So everyone kind of like wants the short version, right? So here's an example of a tip that's something to think about. I had a researcher, she shared some things with me, and she has a grandson, and she was asking him, by the way, she was a lady who was the head of my, I'm a certified education coach, for the state of Michigan. So I'm actually a certified coach, education coach. So she's head of the program. And this is what she said when she had a conversation with her grandson. She's a Black female, her, her Black male grandson. She asked me, well, what is it about sports? Because it's not necessarily a Black person has to teach a Black person. It might help, but we can honestly argue that a white male coach can get a Black male to do pretty much whatever he wants, right? You can't argue that, right? So she was teasing that question, and this is what she said. Her grandson said the reason why he likes sports is one, I feel part of a team. Two, there is immediate feedback, right, and clear instruction. Brilliant. Brilliant. Being part of a team, Black males like working together. They like working together in group projects, right? They like being part of a team. They like clear instructions and immediate feedback. Now, you hear that out loud, you can, oh my God, that's what teaching is. But that's an example of a tip that comes from the book that once you hear it out loud, you kind of go, oh my God, that makes so much sense. So there's a few of those tips in the back of the book. There's another one. For example, there's another researcher here in Michigan named Dr. Saunders, and she works at Eastern Michigan, and she's also works for Michigan Department of Education. And one of the skillful tips that she's used with working with teachers to have Black male success is called positive phone calls home. And positive phone calls home is when you pick up the phone and leave a message, hey, little Johnny had a great day in school, just want to let you know, hang up. And so what happens over a period of time, mom comes home and says, hey, yeah, your teacher called and said you did good in school today. Tell me about that.
Wow.
And now all of a sudden, little Johnny or little Tyrone or whatever his name is, he's like, oh, the teacher's actually on my side now. And then, oh yeah, because then it's just because I'm smart, right? That whole process, and the student recognizes the teacher can be an ally, and then the family realizes that education and teachers and principals can be allies. So those are small tips. There's also some fill out sheets, how to advocate for your child or your school or your PTA with the board, the school boards. I have that in the back. Towards the front, I ask reflective questions. And we as teachers, I'm going to guess that a lot of us joining today have been teachers or are in the education field. We're trained in reflection, right? You do a lesson plan, you look at this work, this didn't work, this is how I'll fix it for tomorrow. We're trained in reflection. So I have reflective questions for each of the individual chapters, right? I have those at the beginning and I also have those at the end to help you process and quote unquote get with the chapter, right? Get with, right? And I'm changing my language intentionally, trying to get with it is what I'm trying to do. But I also have prolepsis questions, and a proleptic question is placing yourself in the future as if it were today. So we're trained to be reflective, but we're not really trained with regards to having goal planning. And so this process that I talk about, the proleptic questions, here's a really good example. You it's 20 years from now, the black male student that you've had the most difficult time connecting with is about to graduate from college.
Mm.
That black male student has about to give the commencement address for their college. And that black male student has asked you to introduce him. Now, what will you say to the audience about how you had a difficult relationship and how it became rewarding and the role that you played in helping that student not only graduate from college, but become a standout? And that's a proleptic question because now you're on stage and you have to think through. And just by going through the steps of how what you can do with that particular black male student to change, right? To see him as someone who's going to be a leader and will make it to college or whatever the occupation or whatever he does after K-12. That black male is going to be successful. What role did you play? And that opens up the door for opportunities, and it does so by having a growth mindset. And it helps teachers go into a frame of mind where they can see themselves as part of solutions, right, and come up with ideas, right, and helps them go through the process. So the additional questions are helping teachers go through those stages of process to
Wow.
open themselves up to thinking themselves as being partners in that black male's education and how they can go, thrive in the future. The really short story, I mentioned I got cussed out by a white female principal. Like, who gets cussed out by a principal, right?
Right.
So so that happened. I was trying to build a rocket ship to the moon with some of my friends. She thought that we were playing. I said, no, we were really trying to really make a rocket ship. We weren't sitting on the desk and pretending. And so when we started building we started building things outside in the front of the school anyway. So she lost her mind. So she did not have a growth mindset. So that wound up me getting into thinking about project-based learning and why that's so important. So now I know as an educator, if I see kids actually building something with like trying to find screwdrivers to put things together that they didn't know what they're doing, those are kids that you need to send to space camp, right? So I
Right.
know that now, right? So she didn't have a growth mindset. However, like I said, it had bad experiences, white teachers, white male teachers, and white female teachers. I also had a white male professor he helped me with my internship program. He wrote my letter of recommendation for my master's program, and then he also wrote my letter of recommendation to my Ph.D. program. Right. So
Wow.
that's what I mean. I had both good and bad experiences. And it's also good for students to know you can have some bad experiences and be okay.
Right. I know we cannot lump, put all black males and whatever in a lump and like just say overall. We can't do that with anybody, with any aspect, women, white women, black women. But I would like to ask you, this is a question that came through, was like, what kind of environment is the best for black males to thrive? Do you understand that question? What they're asking?
Sure, that's a really good question. All right, so environment is really important. Everyone knows how environment plays a role in the way you look at things in your culture, frames how you come up with solutions. And so one thing that we do know about black males is they like to work collectively, and black males tend to work in groups. And so if I have something called the cool factor, and the cool factor is if you can help black males in the classroom balance their academic identity and their social identity and find a really good balance, that's primarily important. So the reason why the social identity is so important, there's an area in the back of our heads. It's directly related to the size of your social network, right? So the space in your brain to making social connections is actually directly measurable to your social network. And it's so active, you can even see it flashing when people are asleep, right? So it's not the same type of thing. Well, this kid wears Jordans. Why are black children or black parents spending X amount of dollars on Jordans and not spending more money on this? Well, if you don't have the right social network, if you're not socially connected, you can go into depression. And if you notice about some of the folks who may have problems, it has something to do with being depressed. And that's directly related to how many friends and social networks. So those Jordans are passcodes there's a shibboleth for you to have connections and for you to have friends. And without you having a sizable relationship in that brain to your social network, you can get into depression and fights and all of those things. So that's something to keep in mind, that that social network is really important. For once you get towards high school, something to keep in mind is black males are not necessarily interested in going in STEM. This is really important. I am switching to to high school. They're not necessarily interested in going into STEM and doing things like they've seen other folks do STEM before. They're interested in learning STEM so they can go back and help their communities. They don't want to do STEM to go in a white environment where they work with other white folks doing quote unquote white things in these companies where they wear these white labs. No, they want to learn things about medical field, about soil, about crops, so they can go back to their community and they can make change. So that social thing for
Wow.
black males is really important, and it shows up differently, and it portrays itself differently for black males than it does for students who may be of other be of a different color.
That is so interesting. So do you know this because there are studies that there are
Yeah,
studies?
that's something. I apologize. I don't remember the researchers who came up with that, but it's called the equity ethic. So if you look up equity ethic, the researchers that I just talked about, they created that term equity. So they're looking at equity as being more important than just making money from being a research scientist.
That is so essential and amazing. And you have some of that information in the book also.
Yeah, that's one of the items that's in the toolkit.
Okay.
So I have, I actually have the researcher's name in the quote in the toolkit. I apologize
No
that I didn't
problem.
remember the researcher's name, but I mean, it's a fairly large book, and there are a lot of researchers that I talk about, and I just didn't remember this. I remembered the content, I just didn't remember
Right.
their names. I apologize.
But it's so interesting that you say that because I've noticed in my community and just being with it, it seems like that a lot of the students that I know and the young black males I know that play sports, that do those kind of things, do better in educationally in their classes. I know a lot of it is I can't play unless I do this, but it's still I feel a connection with being social, being with others, being a team player. I believe it's a direct connection with that and them doing well in the classroom.
So that plays a big role. Socially, males, we like to network, right? That is something that we do. When men have a problem, we identify with the other person that we have a problem with. We'll have that conversation with him. And
Mhm.
there's this direct thing. We're like, yeah, whatever it is, if it's an argument, whatever, guys will have a fight. And then, as long as you stand up for yourself and show some type of gumption, the next day, all right, man, you won't be friends, but you'll at least, get along. And so where women, young girls are more likely to, if there's something going on, they kind of push someone out the group, right? Right. So the bonding and the social network is slightly different from boys than it is for girls, right? So anytime you can get guys in the classroom to compete. So what this may look like, what if you had, you broke up all the students into groups of four. Let's say there's like 3 to 4 students in each one of the group, and whoever got the math problem, whichever table got the most amount of math problems right, they pick someone from the group to take a piece of paper and to throw it in the basket, at the end of the lesson, and at the end of the week, whichever group has the most points for that basket. That's the type of thing where you can get black males interested in doing that competitive thing, right? Because we like to be competitive and like to work in groups. That's a way to engage males to do things. Now, the flip side to that is, well, that's making things competitive. Schools shouldn't be competitive. Well, guys like to be competitive.
Right.
And to be, as a guy, we don't necessarily really care like what's going on and who has a point. It's just fun. That's how we bond and show connection. That's not necessarily things that are allowed inside the classroom. So that's an example of how men, or excuse me, young boys in the classroom and that competitive and that social things, you can build on that, right? And to increase your school engagement.
Wow. Dr. Ransaw, we are coming up. It's been so awesome speaking with you. One last question. What is
Sure.
your hope that people take away and use from your book?
Good question. So the whole point behind the book is to help teachers not just think about, or not just hear about, or not just talk about, but actually feel that they can make strong relationships with Black males, despite what you've seen on TV and despite what you've heard and despite what you've seen. You can actually have a connection with Black males if you're a white female. It is possible. And so once you can kind of get with the idea that it is possible, that opens up that growth mindset. And by opening up your growth mindset, things start to cascade, right? It's a domino effect. And so once you learn how something works with one Black male, you may be able to do that with another Black male. And then what if you only connect with one Black male a year, right? But you do a couple of different things. After 5 years, now you've got 5 different ways to work with Black males, right? So you can build your competency about building connections slowly over a period of
Right,
time.
right.
And you are using things that you came up with on your own. And so you're more likely to remember how to do it, and you're more likely to implement it because you've seen success, because you're the teacher who came up with it. And once you know how you can be successful, it's easier for you to buy into it.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Theodore Ransaw. The book is Mindful Teaching Practices for Black Male Achievement. For speaking engagements, you can reach out to him at ransawth at msu.edu. That's Ransaw, WTH, at msu.edu. To order his book, you can find that on Amazon. And also his website is mindfulteachingpractices.com. That's mindfulteachingpractices.com. Thank you so much, sir, for your time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening.